People often ask me, what is Sufism? And sometimes I like to tell them the parable of tea, which is an answer given in our tradition. In a land called Mazhab, sectarianism, they'd actually managed to get hold of a little bag of tea, which they worshipped. And one day each year, they would bring out this bag of tea and parade it through the streets. And as it passed through the streets, everybody in the town would prostrate before it. Until one year, a man who was visiting the city watched this procession and watched everybody prostrate, and he remained standing. And he was shaking his head, and he said, "No, no, you fools. You have to pour boiling water over it." An audible gasp went through the crowd, and the priests of tea pointed at the man, angry, had him arrested, and he was immediately killed as a heretic for suggesting the destruction of the sacred tea. Fortunately for us, he had told the secret of tea to a few companions and given them what tea he had with him. And so these companions began to brew and drink the tea in secret as he'd taught them. And as they did so, they grew in wisdom, until the wisest among them said this: "The one who tastes knows. The one who tastes not knows not. Stop talking about the celestial drink, but serve it at your banquets. Those who like it will ask for more. Those who don't are not fitted to be tea drinkers. Close the shop of argument and open the tea house of experience." In the land of sectarianism, you have the priests of tea, which are really the priests of religion, who worship the tea in a dry form, but not infused with spirituality, which brings it to life. So it becomes just merely an idol. The heretic is one who actually suggests that you need to taste your spirituality, that you need to taste religion, you need to have that experience for yourself, that experience that the founder of the religion has had. You need to have that experience.
Sufism, and this is in the words of 11th century Sufi master Al-Ghazali, he says clearly Sufism is based on experience, direct experience, not on premise, so not on philosophy, not on method. Now, naturally, we know that a religion formed around Prophet Muhammad. So, but inside of that religion are pedagogies for awakening. Those get treasured by mystics and passed along by mystics. Now, by the 10th century, history says, the scholars will say 10th or end of 9th, the word Sufi comes along. And it's describing not everybody who's a follower of Prophet Muhammad, not everyone who's Muslim, but it's describing those beings who are carrying along this mystic tradition of awakening.
Inayati Sufism is different from other forms of Sufism in a few ways. There are some Sufi orders that are more traditionally based in Islam, and so one wouldn't really be a Sufi without being a Muslim, and that's kind of a point of debate sometimes. The Sufism that Hazrat Inayat Khan kind of represents is universal Sufism. So it represents a viewpoint of the unity of religious ideals, in that all of the major religions and traditions all have kind of the same direction that they're pointing. And it's one of the kind of tasks of humanity to recognize our interconnectedness and not have divisions based on what one set of people believes and another believes.
Hazrat Inayat Khan made it very clear that Sufism is a spiritual path, and you can be of any faith to take part in it. He welcomed every faith and encouraged people to continue in their own tradition while also adopting this universal spiritual path, a very meditative, esoteric path.
From the beginning, Sufism has always acknowledged the divine message as it has been given in all of the great revelations of the world, through all of the prophets and prophetesses. But sometimes that inclusiveness has been forgotten or diminished because of influences which always seek to divide the truth. So Hazrat Pir Moshe Inayat Khan, my grandfather, revived that great insight with tremendous clarity, the insight that all of the prophets and prophetesses of the world have given one message. And the essence of that message is a call to remembrance, a call to remember that we are not here for ourselves, that we are here to serve and remember and glorify the one being. And that it's possible for people of all races, people of all religions to become brothers and sisters to each other, to establish true peace on earth, and together to realize the inner depths of the human life, and in this way awaken to the Absolute.
In 1882, a great being takes birth named Inayat Khan. He's born into a family of the master musicians of India. He's trained by his grandfather. So now he's swimming in a form of Indian Sufism, which is music. And then as a young man finds a Sufi master, Syed Abu Hashim Madani. He trains him and says, you can't stay here, you have to go to the West. You have work to do. And in 1910, he comes with his two brothers and a cousin, the Royal Hindustani musicians, and they land in America. They come to San Francisco. In San Francisco, he meets his first Western disciple. I'm very proud to say it's a woman. And she has a very opening experience in his presence, and she becomes his first disciple. Her name was Ada Martin. He gave her the name Rabia Martin after the great Rabia al-Adawiya, the extraordinary woman master in the early part of Sufism. So had planted this seed of universal loving kindness, universal mysticism called Sufism.
Love is so important for us because it is the core motivation that works through the whole creation and which is the origin of creation. According to a sacred tradition, God says, I was a hidden treasure and I longed to be known. I loved to be known. And so I created the world that I might be known. So the first motive force is this ancient love, this longing to be revealed. And it's that force that has given rise to all that we see around us and our own selves. And we are here, therefore, to fulfill it, to awaken to it, to live it, to purify our heart so that it can be a pure vessel for it. And in this way, return the love that descended from on high and brought forth all of this, to return it and bring it back to the origin again.
Sufism wants to use the power of love, to harness the power of love, to transform the individual in love. There's an emphasis on ishq. Ishq is a word for love in Arabic, but it means passionate love, fiery love. And it emphasizes ishq because that fiery love is the love in which one's own ego is burned up in that desire. It becomes all about the other, about the beloved. And even my own desires are burned in my desire for the beloved and for his or her own good.
Love means that one transcends the boundaries of one's self-ascribed self. As long as one is only concerned about oneself and one's own preoccupations, one's preconceptions, one's self-interests, then love is not really possible. Love is possible when that boundary between self and others is surpassed, and you can see yourself in another, and you can see oneself ultimately in all selves. That's the culmination of love.
To me, love is it's a uniter. If one is talking about like divisions, like, I don't accept you and I don't believe this, then that's the opposite of love. But, the Sufi path of love is to accept all and tolerate all and not be judgmental, not be divisive. And so in that way, it kind of brings in the flavor of more and more unity with one another.
The essence of love. Allah, the one being whom we call Allah or God.
Sufism concerns our relationship with God. Sufism is about the love of God and the purification of the heart to make the heart a vessel for divine love. And this earth and the elements that make up the earth, we know come straight from God. This earth is pure creation, direct manifestation. And so the soul that loves God must necessarily embrace what comes from God and affirm its providence, affirm it as a theophany of the divine nature. Therefore, for Sufis, this earth is sacred, the elements are sacred, and we're reminded of our role as stewards, as caretakers of the living fabric of the planet and the community of all beings that make up this living earth.
Sometimes working with Murids, I introduce them to the practices of the elements, the elemental purification breaths, and really try to integrate that clearly with a relationship with the actual elements. And how do you see that as the possibilities for expressing that in nature, and have you done anything around that yourself?
Yes, there is an ancient principle among the Sufis and among practitioners of a number of other sacred traditions, and that is that as without, so within. The human body and the human mind are microcosms of the great macrocosm. So all that we find in the universe around us exists in us in a concentrated form. And our work is to establish affinities between our inner nature and the outer world, so that the earth in us is in communion with the earth around us, the water in us is in touch with the water that flows in rivers and oceans, and the fire in us is linked to the fire of the sun, and the air in us glides on the breeze of the atmosphere. One of my favorite stories tells about Sheikha Rabia al-Adawiya, and how once she was sitting out in the wilderness and Hassan al-Basri came along and saw her surrounded by animals. There were deer and birds and animals of all kinds gathered all around her. And as soon as Sheikh Hassan approached, they all fled. And he was puzzled. He asked, Rabia, why do they gather around you? And as soon as they see me, they run away. And she asked him, what did you have for breakfast? He confessed he had had some meat soup. And there was his answer. She said that they gravitate toward the ones that they feel safe with.
Mm-hmm. So that has a strong resonance for you as a vegetarian.
Yes, yes.
It made me think of that beautiful picture that Nizami makes of Majnun in the wilderness with the animals all around him, and he's almost like, he almost seems like Shiva in the form of Pashupati, the lord of animals, where they all settle around him in his absorption.
Exactly, and he's seated under a willow tree, the way that the Buddha used to sit under a banyan tree, and Abraham used to sit under an oak tree. Many great beings used to sit under a particular tree. For Majnun, it was the willow tree, which is known to this day in Iran as Bidi Majnun, the willow of Majnun.
I've often seen you taking walks, sometimes up this path. How much of that is a part of your daily life, and how much is necessary for you?
Yes. I like to try to walk every day.
Yeah.
I don't always have that chance, but especially in the colder months, my schedule is less, and I'm able every morning to go out. There aren't so many people around, not so many bugs around anymore. And winter is a time that a lot of people flee from the Northeast, but it's my favorite time here because it's so quiet. One feels the trees are all silent witnesses in the forest. You can really recognize that each of them stands vigil and holds the space around them. All too often, the heart contracts and withers and hardens, and we find ourselves constantly complaining and grumbling and succumbing to a sense of dissatisfaction and apathy and hopelessness. Then we hear the call of the messengers, the prophets, the saints, and the masters, and that is a call that inspires, that reminds us of the sacred mystery all around us and within us. And it revives the heart, and it stimulates us to look and see, open our eyes and look. Here is beauty, here is something that has come straight from the essence of being and has been revealed to you. appreciate this, witness it, and follow the path of beauty as it reveals further and further vistas of beauty. And when you do, your heart will open wider and wider. You'll see more and more. Always beauty is the key. It leads on to further horizons of discovery, because beauty is always just beyond reach. It approaches you, it draws you forth, you pursue it, and then it shows you something more. It withdraws, and you're led on and on, at last, to the endlessness of the divine beauty, which is never exhausted.
तेरे ही नाम से सब इब्तदा है, तेरे ही नाम से सब इंतहा है.
Music gives voice to beauty. All of the arts, when they are attuned to what is beautiful, become vessels for this profound, enlightening grace.
तेरे ही नाम से सब इब्तदा है, तेरे ही नाम से सब इंतहा है. Everything starts with you, Almighty God, and everything finishes with it. तेरी हमदो सना
I think all of us can easily agree that music is a universal language, that these notes, if you study science and physics, you can see we are made out of music. Almost all the living Sufi lineages have music as an integral part of their spiritual practice. Each one different. There's so many beautiful lineages, and usually a lineage is named after an important master in the lineage. So all of us know about Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the great, the most famous mystic poet in America today. So now his followers, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, they become Mevlevi Sufis. And most of you know that in their tradition is a beautiful tradition of whirling, of turning your heart toward God, of the prayer.
Julian,
You're asking me what zikr is, and that's like the most, the innermost, most meaningful thing I could ever talk about. But you asked about in simple terms, so I would say it's a direct encounter with the beloved. To be encountered by God, to be seen and loved, to see and love and feel the alchemy of when the two desires meet.
Going through those four movements and remembering the meanings inherently behind them. Chin to the left shoulder, and dropping down, going up over the right shoulder and up toward the ceiling with La ilaha. There is no God. Feeling that external search for the divine and the disappointment of not finding God in the external world. La ilaha. And out of the disappointment of that search, being pushed inward, turned inward by the disappointment. Illa. Nevertheless. Illa. Then having gone inward and found something inside, something authentic, something true to us inside, we rise up with La, God. And then finally in the fourth movement, allowing the head to drift just down and slightly to the left as if magnetically drawn to the heart with Hu. So, La ilaha, there's no God. Illa, nevertheless, La, God, who is. La ilaha, illa, La, who. La ilaha, illa.
So on the swing, you could say on the sweep, which is usually in the La ilaha, that is experienced. Bring the body into the experience of opening. So you could be given an image of a rose, or a moon. So it can be the opening or releasing. Those are the two kind of somatic experiences on the swing. So if you release and open, what happens? There's some space. So it's a way of saying, I'm not going to go with all my old notions, my old stories, this contraction, this fear. I'm not going to try and get rid of them and get in some kind of battle. No, I'm going to feel the state of openness. What does openness feel like, and release?
La ilaha
And then on the bow, on that, there's the body, in our natural body, there's a sense of wanting to bow before beauty. It's nothing contrived. It's like when you see beauty, you want to be as low as you can psychically so that you receive the full beauty. You don't want to have your stuff standing. But this is all head stuff. And the body just you practice the body knows it's bowing. It's loving beauty. It's surrendering to the one, the who, the what loves. So the surrendering, and then on the rising, there's which I'd never like to say what happens on the rising, because that's the result of after you open and bow, and then we see what comes.
La ilaha illa la hu. 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 My teacher, Samuel Lewis, was a direct disciple of Hazrat Inayat Khan, and had a very strong inner life with him as well. And he reported as an example that 3 years to the day after the passing of his teacher, Hazrat Inayat Khan, Hazrat Inayat Khan appeared to him in full body, and he said from that day on he started training him every day. We started working with him in 1969. I became his disciple, and in 1968, before I showed up, he said he started having visions of people holding hands, singing, chanting, what in a convenient way we'd call the names of God. Now, some 40-some years later, almost 50 years later, we call it the Dances of Universal Peace. And what started in his basement for 10 people is in 35 countries, active in 35 countries. And during his lifetime, he said to us, these dances are going to go around the world. They're not owned by us. It's for us to share them with the world.
God plays all the parts. Love, lover, and beloved. Come on. La ilaha illallah. Let's hear that. La ilaha illallah.
Now, in Sufism, it's traditional to go to the grave of the great teachers. This is something that we do. We go there to get the blessing of the place, that the grave is imbued with a sacred energy, and that it's actually one of the most sacred sites you could go to. So you'll see Sufis traveling all over the world and spending endless hours at graves. This is a very Sufi thing to do.
love the fact that you included the spring too.
Well, I think that that's actually part of it's not like the Darga is the only thing sacred on this landscape. The natural features are what's most important, and how to work. The practice around the Darga into the natural landscape, and considering how, you know, a sacred spot is a sacred spot not because there's a Darga on it, but because it was sacred and then they located something else here.
Yeah.
Toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, Spirit of guidance.
In Sufism, the emphasis is on discovering your own relationship with God. It certainly has many teachings that are meant to introduce us to the divine and help us to understand the divine and break away from more limited notions that are expressed in religion that are what might be called a kind of child's view of what God is. And so Sufism is concerned to mature one's view of God, but not to tell you what God is exactly, but to introduce you to practices where you might discover your own relationship with God. In the language of Hazrat Inayat Khan, to discover your own God ideal. Inside, everyone has an idea of God or an ideal associated with the divine that helps them to express their fullest humanity by being in relationship with that particular ideal.
What is it that our heart bows and bends to? And that's what he would call the God ideal. And that changes throughout life. So as long as that, it doesn't even have to be an image or a concept, although it can be. The main thing that has to work and why you opened is because your heart is opening to some kind of beauty. So we have these very poor images of God, very outdated, very old-fashioned. Who wants to bow to that? But we have to go to the poets. Like Rilke is one who describes God as the great homesickness we could never shake off. Ken Wilber said God has a serious PR problem. So that we need new images. So sometimes in retreat when we start, I tell people, please find a word that you can use to replace God. So that when I read Murshid and it says God this and God that, it just, the mind hardens with that, in the conceptualization and the reification. So even just substituting love, can I bow to love? Do I want to live a life that reflects the fullness of love? For me right now, I would say what I mean by God, or what I would bow to, or what Allah is the great mystery of being and becoming.
One of the first sentences that I heard on this path, and that completely intrigued me, was Pirzia saying, and God asked and someone asked God the question, where can I find you, God? And God said, you can find me where opposites meet. And I would say that that whole idea of first knowing what the opposites are, being willing to kind of sit with them in the heart and stay until the irreconcilable becomes reconciled in the heart. That's what God is for me.
And as part of going inside, you start realizing there's a whole heart quality. There's something going on inside the chest that is big and expansive and deep and contains everything that's ever existed and even more beyond that. And we go inside, we go in there, and we start working with what we find. And we don't know what's going to happen. It's much more than what we ever thought.
The thing about Sufism is having, is learning how to live from the heart. Now, you could say that other traditions say that as well, but here is this kind of very unique path whose basis is to know how to connect with your heart, to live from your heart, to die from your heart. And the heart is seen as an organ that within it is contained the universe.
I think the most important practice on the Sufi path is friendship. And I've thought about this a lot. We're given practices, we're given breathing practices and practices with light and wazifas, and which are kind of sacred phrases that are repeated over and over, zikr, remembrance of God. And all of that is incredibly beautiful and helpful. But I think the real practice, not just of the Sufi path, but just of living, is learning what it means to be a friend and being in community with other people who are sharing that worldview. So, practicing to be a friend is endless and challenging, and learning how to be present when things arise. It takes endless patience and skill. And it's core. Friendship is core to the Sufi path. That's what it's about.
This is also zikr. Now you can use the mudra. Beautiful. You have good time. Wow.